attitude, you need to be the one, rather than sitting around with your coworkers whining and complaining about it. You need to be the positive one. So you need to look at it from an attitude of positivity. All right, we'll roll with it. That's what we do, right? And so if you're the positive one, negativity is infectious, but so is positivity. And I'm sure you've probably seen this in the ones that you've been involved with, but positive attitudes can help to turn the tide. Welcome to the Nice Business Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Train, business, leadership, and culture consultant, and Vistage CEO, Peer Advisory Group Chair. And I'm joined by my friend, Jim Bob Howard, veteran technical consultant. Together, we have more than 60 combined years of business and organizational experience. The purpose of this podcast is to have short but meaningful discussions about the people and culture side of business and how owners and executives can be both kind and successful. Welcome to another episode of the Nice Business Podcast. I'm Richard Train, your host, and my co-host, Jim Bob Howard, and we are very happy to have Randy Murphy with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that I think a lot of people who have spent any time in business had to endure in some way, shape, or form, both from the positive side and the negative side. I think that there's a lot of good that can come from this, but there's some hurdles that I think most people need to deal with, and that is how to manage private equity without losing your corporate culture. So, Jim Bob, why don't you introduce us to Randy?
Sure. I'll give you a quick overview, and then Randy, I'd love for you to catch up because, like we said, it's been, 6 years? A little bit longer since we worked together. It's been a little over a couple of decades. So Randy and I worked together for an offshoot of IBM in the Austin area back at the turn of the century and around the Y2K time. And since then, we've both gone off and done other things. Randy's been a serial entrepreneur and done a number of different adventures. I don't even know the full list. So Randy, I'm looking forward to hearing you tell us about it. But I know you've been through the situation where private equity comes in and culture is impacted. And so I definitely want to hear some anecdotes along those lines too. Why don't you tell us what you've been up to?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jim Bob. Thank you. I appreciate the intro from both of you. Yeah, since really the last 20, 25 years, mostly entrepreneurial in retail, restaurants, technology for retail, technology for restaurants, and then a lot of consulting in between a lot of that. And the consulting really took two different routes. Some of it was going in and helping private equity companies, typically around M&A, and technology companies around M&A. And then the other vein was, it still is, fractional C-level position, usually CEO or COO. And that has been every phase of a company, from startup, pre-seed or pre-capital from PE, post-capital from PE, turnaround, get ready to exit. And then we took private equity on as well with a large retail company that I built. About 10 years in, we took on large capital. And so we've kind of seen a lot of different sides of private equity. And then no private equity is equal, right? It's all a little bit different.
Yeah, I will tell you that for anybody who has gone through it, I mean, there is always that potential for culture change. And granted, when you think about it, most of the time, private equity comes in because there is something that's working with a business because of the culture.
Yeah.
Now, not always. Sometimes there's a culture that's suffering and they want to be able to turn it and burn it. And that's fine. But for the circumstance where there is a culture that is working, which makes that particular business attractive for private equity to come in and either from a partial investment or a full ownership takeover, there's something that happens when the culture is moved around at the upper levels, because that then affects everybody else in the company. So give me some examples, if you would, of where you've seen it work well and where you have seen it really cause some chaos and change the culture for the worse.
Yeah, maybe we start with where it doesn't work as well. And actually, a lot of times it's the condition of the company that a lot of times will dictate if it works or not. A company that is blowing and going and they're taking on capital to grow faster, whatever, to take money off the table. It's a positive raise, if you will. That tends to be more of the culture shock and the culture situation of things needing to change. And I'll come back to this, but the main reason things change is what I've seen is the group that is putting in the capital, they have very different needs, requirements, and wants than the people running the business. And it's completely apples and oranges. And a good executive team tries to kind of float that movable bridge between and try to keep commerce going, right? So that's kind of the one scenario. But I've also been on the scenario of rescue capital, right? In two forms. Rescue capital coming into a business that has a lot of promise, but for whatever reason, they ran out of steam. Maybe they had the wrong leadership. They didn't have enough capital. Maybe they needed to make a really big pivot in their business plan and they didn't have the ability to do it. That tends to put culture, anything else on the back burner. It's about life-sustaining support of that business. And then in close kin to that scenario is the turnaround, right? And especially a private equity turnaround, because in a lot of situations like that, the leadership team is usually jettisoned and they don't have anyone running it and they can't come in and actually do it. So they kind of empower a newer group to come in and turn a company around. And so those being kind of the three different situations. Let me go back to the first one. So we're in a positive situation where private equity comes in and they are there to do either a minority investment or majority or even full control of the business, full ownership of the business. Those typically, right, very rarely it's not this way, but almost always that private equity group, the principals, the operating partners, they all want a short hold. They want to flip that asset. They want to financially engineer this new thing that they think it's worth X today and it's going to be X to the second or third power tomorrow. And how are they going to get there? Through tightening some controls financially, possibly some organic growth, certainly new go-to-market ideas, and possibly a little bit of M&A. And that's what they get paid for, right? They sign up to be private equity principals with somebody else's money, and they really don't get paid a lot of money until they create value and sell it. That's kind of counter to that growth company that took on that money, right? And you got kind of the tribal leaders of the knowledge in that business. A lot of them are sweat equity. They have a very clear vision. They think that they're just getting money to keep their plan going, and it's just not.
With no strings attached.
Absolutely. It's just so different. And a lot of those people are there because of longevity and continuity and consistency of the management team or the ownership group or whoever the first owners were. And it's just completely different when an owner comes in for a short hold, which almost all private equity is. Very rarely, maybe family offices is probably the only scenario where they're there for a much longer hold. And it makes sense, right? If we were all, principals of a private equity group and you're looking at your total comp for a decade and you go, okay, I don't really make a whole lot of money unless I sell stuff. I can bring in plenty of money to live and have a decent lifestyle, but it doesn't change my family until we move an asset, right? And so their view on things is short term. Typically, it is all about financial engineering, and financial engineering is the antithesis of culture, right? Usually, culture doesn't come with significant and soft ROI investment, right? We're going to put $1 in, we want $1.30 out. Whereas culture, these are non-negotiable things that are carved in stone as you're sweating over code in your early days, or you're sharing a garage apartment and all the things I'm sure we've all been through. And so you have to almost create a situation or a barrier, kind of a membrane around that culture and start talking the same language. And I always felt it was really important to communicate that message right there to the ELT, which usually knows, the executive leadership usually knows kind of the thing that's going on, but middle management, the people on the front line, the people that hold the culture of the company that's now in jeopardy, typically with new capital, those are the people that have to be communicated to. And often, and Jim Bob, you mentioned this, a lot of times we never knew. I mean, think back when we were at Tivoli years ago, we just heard rumors about the big bad IBM and how we're going to change stuff. And I mean, no one was telling us day to day how our life was going to change, but we were the culture of Tivoli, right? The Friday beer bashes and all the really cool things that we used to, and it was epic. But it eventually changed. And so massive communication to the group that holds the culture, being able to talk, but it's two-way street, right? We have to be able to talk to that new owner in ways that they understand it. A lot of times it's, we have a good culture and we have a Friday beer bash. And no. How about this? How about operationalize some of the things that your culture is all about? Hey, we got zero turnover. And we have, 15% of our people refer other people into our company. And things like that, where you can put a metric around that will make sense in the eyes of the owner who's trying to financially engineer the business. And so those are some of the things we would do, and really try to have a separation of communication two ways. So usually a CEO talking to the ownership group, translating that to operational leadership, and that message being communicated loudly and often. And so those are some of the things that we would do. And it's really hard, to be quite honest. It never ends the way people think it's going to. And sometimes it ends remarkably good. Sometimes it never really takes off, and maybe sometimes it's wrong leadership. But I don't think really anybody knows truly what's going to happen when private equity puts in capital. And that's just because they don't run the company. That's the other part, is they come with all of these, all this advice and these connections and this service, this consultant, that consultant. But when it's all said and done, it's the people that are leading that business, how they take that support. Some private equity companies I've worked for one, that's how they sold themselves. But literally, when the transaction's done, you talk to them once a quarter for half hour, 45 minutes. That's it. There is nothing else that you're connected to. But then you've got the other the other extreme, like a Vista Equity. And you do a deal with them, and literally, I'm joking, but they literally back a truck up to the back of your office, rip everything out that you have, and they plug everything in that is in their standard tech stack and MO for taking over a company. So those are the two extremes, right? And there's positives and negatives to both of those. Boy, the latter is really good for private equity and flipping things and getting communication and lockstep and plugging them in. But boy, think about that from a culture shock. Everything has changed. Your ERP is different. Your CRM is different. Your code repository and how you do DevOps is completely different if it's a tech company. And it's hard to maintain the great talk around the water cooler when something like that happens. But if you want to have real change real fast, that's a great way to do it. The other way is death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, it's gonna leave a lot of bodies in their wake. But if that's not their ultimate goal, is what it is, right?
Yeah.
I think it largely comes down to understanding what the ultimate goal is. And the conversation that Jim Bob and I had recently, where we were talking about the leadership at the top who are talking about this with the PE group, they've been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
And they know what's going on, and they know what to expect. When everybody underneath them do not know, when they're not aware of what's going on, that's when you get the major hit to culture.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that too is that there are things that you can't share, right? There are things that you can't talk about because they impact things.
Right.
When your employees get wind of something changing, at a minimum causes stress, which is introduced into whatever work that they were doing. And so maybe they deliver a little less, or maybe they deliver a little less on time, or whatever the situation is. But at the same time, there's definitely, in order to really have culture continue, or to at least be considered and be on the table of what's going on, is that got to have some level of transparency and honesty with your people. Listen, here's the reason why we're looking for this. This is the growth that we're looking to do, but be honest with them. So listen, the team that got us here is not necessarily the team that's going to take us to the next spot. We're going to bring in new people. Some people are going to choose that this is not the opportunity for them. And others are actually going to either get to just stay where they are, or maybe move up, or maybe move down, and maybe they're okay with that. There's going to be movement, right? In either way. And just being able to talk with people about, look, I don't know who that's going to be yet, right? And I don't necessarily know how to tell you how to position yourself to be the one that stays, or to be the one that gets the great job offer someplace else. But just understand this change is going to come. And I think always having a resume dusted off and ready is a good idea regardless. But there are times when you see those winds of change coming that it's still a good idea to get it. Hey, let's see if it makes sense for me to have my resume ready to go. But those are the folks that I think, like you said, Randy, they're the ones that drive the culture. It's the people that have been there, put in the sweat equity. They've got the scars to prove it, and things have been going well for them. But you do reach a plateau at times that you're like, this can't go any further the way we've done it. And while we all would love it to stay kumbaya the whole time, it can't if we're going to go further. And in fact, we can't even keep it at the level that we want it to stay. We can't keep it here either. So it's grow or die. It's not, there's no status quo option. And I'd love to hear from you, Randy, has there been situations where you've been able to get that communication across down to the managers, down to the frontline workers, to where they understand, look, change is going to happen. It's going to affect you. I can't tell you exactly how, but know that it's coming, just so that you're not caught completely off guard.
Yeah, you make some really good points there, Jim Bob. I think probably the best example was the one that I was talking to Richard about quite a few years, I guess it was 3 years ago. I did a year turnaround on an outsourced accounting and finance operations and a private equity owned business that probably shouldn't have been bought by that particular private equity group. It was an aspirational idea, and they ended up not capitalizing on that sort of strategy. They kept in their bailiwick going forward, but they still had this asset in their portfolio, and it basically turned into a dumpster fire without their doing. It was a management team that was in there. And so I got kind of parachuted into this thing, and I won't go into the details of what had happened because that's a whole other podcast, literally, really and sad and funny. But that was probably the best example of what you were saying. I mean, as soon as I hit the ground, I realized a couple of things. A lot more was going on at this company than the private equity company knew. And the second was nobody other than the former management team knew anything that was going on, nor what was coming. And so literally we started, I say we, but I didn't really have an executive team at that point. It was myself and then an operational team, a leader. We had about 50 people in the company. I don't know, about 7 or 8 million in revenue, not a big company, a smaller one, but it was growing. And so I just said, hey, look, I'm going to be as open and transparent as possible. And I'm going to tell people, look, this is what I know. This is what I don't know. This is what is going to change. This is what isn't going to change. And it's a common business phrase. The only thing that is constant in business is change. And what sucks about that, you guys remember that book from, 20, 30 years ago, Who Moved My Cheese? Yeah. Remember that? Yeah. I think that's what it's called. The best book ever. Because guess what? We as humans, we don't do well with change. And actually, not even that. My theory is people are okay with change. They're not okay with not knowing what it is, when it's coming, and how it's going to affect me, right? So there's everything around all this stuff. And it usually can be mitigated with communication, education, time, whatever. And so I just said, hey, look, I need to communicate as much as possible, be absolutely transparent, more so than I think I ever would have in a company of that size, because the culture was literally being pulled apart at the seams, and the company was starting to pull apart and go towards the old regime. And so I just said, hey, this complete transparency. This is everything that's going on. And it worked out really well because they needed to hear, they kind of felt lied to, right, for a year. And it wasn't really the private equity owner. It wasn't their fault, but they were disengaged. You're not engaged at a management level with a private, and that's the point of private equity. You hire somebody else to manage the asset you have, right? And so that worked very well in that situation. And I think for the most part, that can be a recipe for success really wherever you go. Now, your point, absolutely true. There are certain things, especially strategic things, maybe it's M&A related, certainly job or personnel related. You can't communicate all that stuff. But I have found people stay longer, trust management, and end up trusting ownership if they just know what's going on and they feel, most importantly, that you respect and value them as being in the know of the business, that a lot of times the only reason you're there is because they were there, because they had something that they were able to raise money on.
Yeah. Consultants like myself, we love things like, alliteration. One of the things that I've said on several occasions when it comes to change is acceptance, attitude, and action. So basically what I mean by that is something's going to happen. This change is going to happen. So you can fight it or you can accept it. It's going to happen. So you may as well just accept it. So that's number one. Number two, attitude. You need to be the one, rather than sitting around with your coworkers and, whining and complaining about it. You need to be the positive one. So you need to look at it from an attitude of positivity. All right, we'll roll with it. That's what we do, right? And so if you're the positive one, negativity is infectious, but so is positivity. And I'm sure you've probably seen this, in the ones that you've been involved with, but positive attitudes can help to turn the tide amongst the rank and file. It's definitely a leadership thing. And as far as action, what I mean by that is with every change, there is opportunity. It may not be the opportunity that you were expecting or that you necessarily wanted, but there's still opportunity. Because what's going to happen is, just like Jim Bob was saying, some people are going to accept it, and those that aren't might find a better job for themselves somewhere else. So there's going to be change in swirl in the people at different levels. So you might have an opportunity to be able to bump up in position, right, by being positive and having a great attitude and looking for that opportunity. And the plus side of this, even for the people who are on the new management team, is they're seeing stars that the old ownership didn't even realize were there. So speak to that if you could.
Probably the best example I would give to that is the current company that I'm a fractional CEO for, Farmhouse Delivery, private equity owned. It's actually one of those rare private equity groups that is a little bit more family office oriented. And so they hold things much longer. And so they have really big strategic aspirational goals about changing the world with some of their investments. And flat out, they're doing it in a lot of different ways. But the arm that I work with is they're kind of the rescue capital arm. And this particular investment was for an e-commerce, direct-to-consumer farm and ranch, a commissary-based product to home delivery, right, in Central Texas. And phenomenal idea, getting people to eat local, really high-quality food. And the private equity company injected capital into the business and said, hey, look, we want to grow this business. We want to kind of see who we have. Let's see what we need. And we want to grow the business, make it profitable, but also launch retail. And when I came in right about the time that they relaunched it, and the first thing we realized was I would say 25, 30% of that business, of the people that were in that business, were key personnel. And I don't mean someone who just has been there a long time or is a high level person. No, these are 4 or 5 people of about a 20-person company that doing around $3 or $4 million, a smaller business in e-commerce, that literally knew everything about the business and shared the vision as well that the new ownership group bought. And so that one was actually a relatively easy bridge between what the private equity company wanted and what we called NewCo, because they kind of recapitalized the business. And what was so great about that is a lot of times when you take on private equity, you really want to circle the wagons without it being defensively postured inside the business. You want to circle the wagons. You want to really identify what are the non-negotiable culture things that you absolutely have to maintain on the other side of this growth capital. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to include the new private equity ownership. They're going to be a part of it in any way they can. Right. But just put it out there and say, hey guys, this is what we all believe in. We're going to try to maintain this as much as possible, but we're going to try to mix those with your guys' financial and strategic goals as well. And what we found, there was such incredible alignment, and we found that we had so much more value and really knowledge inside the existing base than they even realized as they were doing the acquisition. And the asset was more valuable in their eyes once we got in and really saw what we had to do and where they wanted to go. I mean, it was 100% of them were like, let's go, let's do this thing. And so that was kind of one of the rare situations. The things that we've not fought but struggled on are just simply how to deal with, how do we plug in certain parts of the mothership into our daily operations that we don't have to replicate. We can go to them. And then how do we communicate? How do we exchange information? How do we let them know how we're doing? And how do we get their attention when we need help? And that's a good thing if those are the things you're working on and not alignment of financials or alignment of strategy or anything like that. That's been very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. Great.
No, that's great. That's great.
I guess one of the things that I'm curious about, so from a PE standpoint, from their side of things, if there's somebody who's listening to this or watching this and they are in private equity, what do you think is probably one of the top 1 or 2 things that they do that they probably shouldn't do, that they could probably learn from and maybe do it a little bit different on their next venture?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And my first thought when you asked that was it really depends on the size of the private equity group. And then I started thinking, just because you're big, like a GA or a SoftBank or whatever the capital group is. Just because you're large doesn't mean you can't do the tactical things that you need to plug into a company's culture. I would say too often, and I've seen this, I've had about 9 separate relationships with businesses with private equity, maybe 10. And every one of them always only interfaces with the executive leadership team. And this is hard to do, right? It's hard to be men of the people, right? And get out and be a part of the general population. But if there's a way they can do that, there are probably private equity groups out there, or more importantly, specific operating partners that probably do this very well, especially ones that have an operating model where maybe that operating partner has only a few portfolio companies, and which gives them time to work week to week on particular engagements and stuff in their portfolio. But that's not typical, and it's not what I've seen. And so I would say, winning hearts and minds is everything. You had mentioned earlier, Richard, leadership, everything can be overcome with the right leader, I think, in a lot of different ways, right? And that leadership doesn't only have to come from the seed team that's there. It can come from the sponsor or their operating partner that is the only connection that almost everybody in that company sees to this, quote, owner group, right? Especially in some of these bigger companies. These people that are on the board that no one ever, these are almost fictional people, right? They're just people that kind of float around above the company that no one ever sees. I think if they could make themselves a little bit more of a human picture story, this is who I am, this is my family, I do this, I do that, I'm going to be here, 6 times this year, I'm going to hit every cultural opportunity. I think is absolutely critical. And gone are the days of, oh, hey, let's save money and not spend time traveling to go see people I think that's absolutely crap, right? I think the times that you can be with your coworkers in person, and or if you represent the ownership group, you absolutely have to be there in person. And because there's just no substitute, right? There's no substitute for being able to spend a few hours in person live, because they'll trust you. You'll learn more about the business. You're always going to pick up stuff if you're that private equity owner. So that's what I would say. Get involved, stay involved, be human, and hit every single activity or event that you can to press as many palms as you can, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the huge part, is the staying human, right? Because that's where we all come in, right? I love organizations that consider the human first. Not even just talking about private equity, but they consider their employees first. They consider their clients first. They consider the people who work at their clients first. Yeah. Yes, there's business to be done. Yes, there's projects to be completed. There's timelines, there's budgets, there's all of that. But taking the time to say, hey, I noticed you're out sick last week, right? Or just, reaching out and just seeing how are you feeling better now? Hey, you've got something going on at home. Is there anything we can do to cover, while you're gone? And even if it's, hey, you don't have to worry about anything. You go take care of family. We'll take care of this. We'll put the client on the back burner as needed. Say, listen, hey, this guy's got an emergency, and we're not going to give you details about it, but we got to pause while he takes care of that, because we can't really backfill, this person in this short amount of time and really give you the same value. It's better for you if you pause with us while we let this person get whole when everything's going on in their family. And that I think that same thing still comes across regardless of how you're coming into the organization. If you're coming in as a manager, if you're coming in as an individual contributor, if you're coming in as the board member for a PE, that all of that, you're still dealing with humans, right? And I think that goes back to the name of this podcast is Nice Business. And the idea is that we can be nice to each other. We can be kind to one another and take other people into consideration so that we keep that human touch with everything that we do. And yes, some of the stuff we do is very technical. Some of the stuff is it's not human, but the people working there are. And having that human connection, I think, is super important, whether you're the PE guy or you're the CEO, but even before you've gone private equity, just if you're in leadership, you need that human connection.
Let me give you the antithesis of what you were just saying, Jim Bob, because this is typically what happens, and you guys are going to nod your heads on this. I won't name any names here because this is a really big private equity company. I used to work for an operating company inside a very large private equity portfolio in the software side, and they were growing tremendously. And guys, they had about a 38% EBITDA margin. Okay. I'm not talking gross margin. I'm talking bottom line cash. Okay.
Wow.
Absolute cash machine. And that's with massive growth, right? So they're throwing capital at it and they're still throwing off almost 40% EBITDA, right? This is where the disconnect happened on the we're not human front. So a directive comes down. Hey, we're getting close to our fiscal year end. We're in the last 6 months. We got to hit our numbers. We got to hit our numbers. We got to hit our numbers. Okay. They basically did a hiring freeze. So no new people coming in, and they were growing. And so the people that had these goals were also being pulled to do things that were contrary to hitting their goals. It was negative if they didn't hit them. So here I kept hearing, when I was a consultant for this company at the time, quite a few years back, and I kept hearing these people that are like, man, I'm working 70, 80 hours a week. We're going into the holidays. They want me to work over the holidays. But the good and bad is the leader of this business would always show, hey, this quarter we did this. We made this much money. We did this. They're going, in their mind, they're going, we are on a Bataan death march so that someone we don't know can make 38%, and we're killing ourselves. We're not getting bonused. We're not going to hit our numbers now because of this M&A thing we're always having to spend time on. And this is going wrong. And that probably wasn't really the message from the ownership group. It was probably, hey, we need to hit this and this, because if we do, we can go bring in another large investor at a much higher valuation, which is good for everybody who has equity. That's probably what the message was. But when it got down to the frontline workers, it was, why am I working over the holidays so someone I don't know can get 38% margin and I don't get anything?
Right.
That's where it really starts pulling apart, right? And that's that. You got to go back to that communication thing and really tell people why. Jim Bob, we need you to do this. And if you do this, your piece of this is going to be twice as valuable. Okay. Or whatever that motivation is. Sure. But it just doesn't translate, through the filters.
Absolutely. And I think that's a story that probably is a lot more common than some people realize. To Jim Bob's point, he's heard me say this on more than one occasion, but conversations like that have to do with the old saying, we make data-driven decisions. I mean, the entire modus operandi of PE is data-driven decisions.
Right.
So oftentimes forgetting that there are people on the other side of that data, because it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And so last question for you is, if you could give one piece of advice to any company thinking about going through private equity at any level, whether it's, complete or partial or what have you, what do you think would be one thing that they could learn from this discussion?
Yeah, so taking control out of the question, right? It's just, hey, private equity's coming in. It could be full control, just capital.
Not if, but whatever. This is what we want to do. How do we do it the right way?
I'm going to give you two because they go hand in hand. Okay. Number one, like I mentioned earlier, if you get the opportunity before the investment is made, so during the courting stage, the dance, even due diligence, the leadership team, if you can, don't figure out your non-negotiables in a room with just a couple of people. Literally ask the people that own the culture, because you as the leader don't own the culture. You're just trying to guide it. Ask the team, what are our non-negotiables, and communicate those early. Communicate those before ink is dry, and then everyone at least knows where they're starting from, and it doesn't shock the PE group on the other side that you're like, hey, we all wear kilts to work, and we would have loved to have known that, or whatever the crazy thing is on the culture. But so that's number one. But then once you're on the other side, just communicate to people, communicate everything that you can communicate. Even if you don't have an answer, tell them that. Tell your team that. I don't have an answer on this, guys. I wish I did. I don't have it yet. I'm going to get it to you as soon as possible. It just makes people not worry about their cheese being moved a little less, I guess.
Yeah. Or in the old Brene Brown thought process, clarity is kindness.
Yes, it is. Exactly. Tranquility too. Yeah.
As much as you can have. Randy, listen, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because I know from my own experience with PE and so many others that I know that I've spoken with, woulda, shoulda, coulda, and I wish I'd known this back then. So hopefully if somebody is listening to this or watching this and they are going through it or about to go through it, We've given them some pearls of wisdom to be able to implement in their own businesses and cultures to be able to make it as smooth as possible. And I just want to be clear, PE is not an evil empire. It can be fantastic for your business if done right. And there are some wonderful private equity companies and partners. But if you're not on the same page, it's not necessarily going to go well. So make sure you know how to get on the same page. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Nice Business Podcast. We hope you got some valuable information and inspiration. We're always looking for great stories that will help your business be more kind and successful. And if you know of one we should hear or someone that would be a great interview, please let us know. To contact me, click the link here to go to my website or use this QR code. I wish you a nice business.